Okay, so it's 6 o'clock, so we'll get started. I would ask everyone to mute their devices while you wait to speak. It'll avoid any extraneous noise, and as well, it prevents feedback. So good evening, and my name is John Urino. I see some familiar faces from the prior hearing on this case. Welcome, Lexi. This is case C9-2120. It's the continued and reopened hearing. And Mr. Beal, I'd like to start with you updating us on the approvals and protests to date, please.
Yes, Mr. Reno, 1 second. We did receive all the approval, and we've received almost like 76 approvals that we sent over to you. Some of those we haven't been able to go through yet to see if some were already approved. The same thing for the protests we received. 1 second here.
Turn it up. Turn it up.
Apologize. 1 second here.
Just take your time, Mr. Beal.
Okay. Okay. And then the protests that we did receive a petition that we sent over to you from Mr. Hawk that had 101 names on there. We had actually received a petition list prior, so I'm not sure how many were different. And then the combined protests that we received, as far as some new ones, were basically about 20 new protests. Well, I don't know if about new, but 20 that sent in. Some were similar from the last hearing, but we also had some other materials that people sent in, some new materials regarding some photos which you received, and some updated letters and updated some other comments as well for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beal. So just for everyone's kind of background information, for those of you who haven't done these very many times before, the approvals and protests really come into play at the mayor and council level, and above a certain threshold or percentage of protests within a certain distance from the property, the mayor and council then would have to have a supermajority vote. So I asked Mr. Beal to update those for my purposes, just so I have a sense of what's going on, but they're not germane really or relevant at this level. It does give me a sense, though, of how many folks out there in the community have written in and protested or written in with an approval. But just for your background, I thought I would share that. I want to make one or two more preliminary remarks, and then turn first to the applicant and then to those who have asked to speak at the hearing. And then, as I always do in hearings, anyone who hasn't written in or emailed in or phoned in who wants to speak, I will ask anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak to go ahead and participate after those who have already requested to speak have had their turn. So that's number one. Number two is I've reviewed everything in the record that's been provided to me. So that includes all of the protests, all of the approvals, all of the letters, the traffic cam. Someone's got a pretty good drone, looks like, the photographs of Houghton Road. And I understand that one of our participants tonight, Mr. Latour, is going to take the opportunity to share his screen and show us a couple of video clips, so that's fine. So that's the second thing, is I've reviewed everything that's in the file and everything that's been provided to me to date. That's not said to suggest that you should curtail or cut short your remarks. Everyone's testimony, both the applicant's testimony and those who are not the applicant, is important to me. I have also reviewed my notes of the prior hearing, and it's not so long ago that I don't remember the testimony at the prior hearing. I do remember the testimony at the prior hearing. I would ask you, if you spoke up at the last meeting, fine and welcome back. but I would ask you not to simply retread the exact same ground you went on before. And that's more just, to give others an opportunity to participate who may not have come in before. And I can assure you, I have not forgotten what was on your mind at that date. So with that, all that said, Ms. Willett, would you like to be heard first?
Yes, Mr. Urino, absolutely. First and foremost, we really appreciate your thorough review of our rezoning case, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you and the rest of the public here this evening. For the purposes of the record, my name is Lexi Well, and I'm a project manager at the Planning Center, which is located at 2 East Congress in downtown Tucson. I'm also joined this evening by Linda Morales with the Planning Center, as well as a number of team members who have been intimately involved in this process that we'd like to speak to address some of the concerns that have been brought forth by the neighbors, as well as in your preliminary report. So I have Mr. Bill Carroll with EEC on the line, who is the civil engineer looking at the ultimate development of this site and the flooding issues out there. I've got Mr. Avi Buckles with Westland Resources on the line, who has been intimate with the archaeology studies and is very familiar with the mitigation program. So he will address, the work done to date, as well as the impacts of the dumping that was of issue on the site. And then I've also got representation from La Mariposa and from the developer. So representation from La Mariposa is Mr. Colin Brennan, who will be presenting some information to you, as well as Philip Aries, who represents the developer. If you have any questions for him, he's available as well. To just recap briefly, because I know we've got some new faces on the line here, I just wanted to recap what our proposal is. And then I will go into more of the specificities of what we're proposing and what we heard and what we'd like to clarify. So that being said, can you all see what's on the other side of my screen? Perfect.
Yeah.
So if you can click the next slide for me, Linda. So as we had mentioned back in early December, this site is the area that we are looking to rezone consists of a 20-acre site located at the northwest corner of Houghton Road and Corte Vista La Mariposa, about 1/2 mile north of Speedway Boulevard and 1/2 mile south of Tanque Verde Road. Next slide, please. The request before you this evening is to rezone an approximately 20 acres of a 36-acre site from SR to R2 to develop a multifamily community known as Casita Village at La Mariposa, which at full build out will consist of 179 single-story units. 47 of those 179 are currently permitted south of Corte Vista La Mariposa and an already entitled land. So in other words, this rezoning would allow for 132 units to develop on the north side of Corte Vista La Mariposa, which is currently vacant land. Before turning the mic over to my other team members, I'd like to provide information to clarify how the proposed rezoning is in conformance with Plan Tucson and the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. But prior to doing that, something we all must keep in mind when discussing long-range planning documents such as Plan Tucson or the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan is the intent of the goals and policies and the scale of the area that they are being applied to. So in other words, not only do we have to consider site-specific situations, but also how they play into the greater planning area. So when considering policies of Plan Tucson, we have to think of the city as a whole, not just a site as an individual. And when considering policies listed in the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, we also have to consider the entire 925 acres that comprise the planning area and not just the individual parcels that make up a development in a site. So with that, I'm going to dive into compliance with Plan Tucson. In your preliminary report, Mr. Urino, and the comments received from the neighbors, it was suggested that the proposed development does not contribute further to neighborhood stability, nor is it designed sensitive to the surrounding scale and intensity of the surrounding existing development. When discussing neighborhood stability, one must consider what in fact contributes to it. The land use planning profession teaches us that stable neighborhoods, among many things, are those that are attractively and sensitively designed for both the natural and built environment. They are those neighborhoods that are managed and maintained or present a care for the land. They provide access to housing choices and amenities, and they improve the overall quality of life through improved drainage, infrastructure, amenities, etc. Considering all of this, I'd like to offer that the proposed rezoning further contributes to neighborhood stability by the following, or for the following reasons. It removes vacant land that could be susceptible to dumping, vagrancies, and trespassing. It features a well-designed community that consists of attractive landscaping and one-story buildings oriented towards an arterial roadway that has been identified as a major corridor in the city. And it provides a cluster development that is sensitive to the natural environment and produces far less disturbance per home as opposed to a traditional single-family residence. It offers a housing choice that diversifies the current housing stock and provides alternatives for a wide range of age groups to live near existing neighborhoods. It protects and preserves the natural watercourses and important riparian habitats and provides a vehicle for dedication of the important waterway to ensure that those resources are protected by a public entity into perpetuity. And it provides a transition in land uses from the resort and the adjacent office zone properties, which are currently entitled to develop with multi-story hotels, apartment, and office buildings. The other item I'd like to clarify as it relates to Plan Tucson and the findings of the reports and comments is the site's access. Plan Tucson suggests that medium density development is generally appropriate where access is provided to an arterial and directed away from the residential subdivision, or directed away from the interiors of the residential subdivisions. Well, access to this proposed development is provided by an arterial road, which is Houghton, via private road known as Corte Vista La Mariposa. That is not a public road, and so access is gained from a arterial road. Secondly, as mentioned in the other public hearing before you, the developers are committed to installing signage directing traffic towards Houghton Road and not the interior of the neighborhood, which would be accessed through the resort off of Bonanza Avenue. And then additionally, something that we'd also like to offer as new information is that the developers will be replacing the existing entryway off of Bonanza with a new controlled access gate for authorized members of the resort only. And then the last bit of information as it relates to access is access management practices and best practices for arterial roadways. And given the existing intersection of Corte Vista and La Mariposa, there is some concerns with putting additional access driveways, as this is an arterial roadway, and you want to ensure on arterial roadways that you minimize access if the development intensity is appropriate, and a single family residential, a residential development such as that we are proposing does not generate intense traffic volumes that would be appropriate there on the arterial roadway. So that being said, that's what I'd like to offer with Plan Tucson. And the next item I'd like to move into is the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan and our compliance with that. So if you could go to the next slide for me, Linda, that'd be great. In reviewing your preliminary reports and the comments received from neighbors, it has been suggested that the proposed rezoning does not comply with the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan due to the incompatible nature of the proposed land use, the lack of owner-occupied homes, and flooding issues. I have thoroughly reviewed the goals and policies of the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan and would like to further clarify how we are in compliance with the policies and goals as prescribed. Yeah, I need the next one. I'm sitting there on the keyboard. So this development, as we have described previously, proposes a high quality community with a density that is well under the maximum allowable density per the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. The Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan allows for a density of 6 to 16 units to the acre with an allowance to go up to 20 units to the acre with an approval from adjacent neighbors, and of course contingent upon satisfactory flooding solutions. The overall density for the rezoning area equates to about 6.6 dwelling units per acre, and for the total project area, so when looking at the entire 36 acre, we are at a overall density of 4.97 units to the acre. So we're actually under, when you look at the entire site, and just slightly over what the minimum requirement is for this area. And then just to even further demonstrate that we still are within that appropriate category as specified by the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, when you remove all of the proposed open space, so the floodplain that cannot be developed, we are still under that maximum density and in fact in the middle of that range there. So again, the density is appropriate per this document that governs this area. And then,
Ms. Willett?
yes.
Quickly, so where are you at if you back out the floodplain area and looking only at the 20-acre parcel? What's the density there?
So just looking at the remaining 20 acres, once you reduce the 17 acres of open space, we're at about 9, it's a little over 9 units to the acre.
Thank you. And then a question from before, the slide before, where's the gate going to be? Proposed
So the gate is, there's currently an entryway right in this general area. And so the entry we're replacing the gate that's in this area right here that exists today with a controlled access gate.
So that means that folks, if this is approved and built, folks who live in the proposed development will only access through Houghton?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Please go right ahead.
The other item I wanted to touch base on is the flooding issues and the policies suggesting that rezonings are not appropriate unless detailed hydraulic studies have been performed. And we're here to clarify that and provide additional information to further explain what Mr. Carroll had described at our last hearing, but detailed hydraulic studies have been performed, and I'd like to further clarify that we are in conformance because development of this site will comply with City of Tucson and FEMA floodplain regulations. Mr. Carroll will discuss this in greater detail further in the presentation, but a floodplain use permit was applied for and approved by city engineering, which ultimately signifies that the approach presented in the floodplain use application and ultimately will be, used to further this rezoning effort is a satisfactory flooding solution. And I'll let Bill get into that, but I wanted to just bring that up front that we have addressed the policies suggested by the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan as it relates to flooding, excuse me. And then probably the last bit of information that I really want to hit on, and I do have a few more beyond this one, but one of the biggest concerns that I have read in both the preliminary report issued by yourself as well as many of the neighbors was how the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan suggests a mix of housing choices that is with emphasis on single-family owner-occupied units. And I'd like to offer some clarification here and get back to the first point I made is when we consider these planning documents, we have to consider the scale of which they're applied to. And so when we take that policy that is listed in the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, it is being applied for all residential uses within the 925 acre planning area that encompasses the Bear Canyon neighborhood. And so when you look at our proposal and the larger planning context of this area, we in fact do achieve the housing mix that is desired by the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. And this is because when you look at it at the planning area as it exists today, it is predominantly characterized by owner-occupied single-family residential communities such as the Lakes of Castle Rock, etc. And it's also important to consider that just because the development that we are proposing is rental and multifamily in nature, each of the units will function very similarly as a single family residence, and that each of these units will be occupied by one family. Each of these, with the exception of 1-bedroom units, which will function more like an attached residence, like a duplex, but that is also considered a single family residential housing type in planning lingo, if you will. But beyond those 3 items that the neighbors have suggested as being the biggest reasons why we aren't in conformance, I'd like to offer about 6 more reasons as to why we are in compliance with the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. We provide a transition again from La Mariposa Resorts, which has plans and entitlements to expand, and the higher intensity land uses encouraged by the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. Mr. Brennan with La Mariposa Resorts will present after me here to explain the plans of the resort and how this fits into their overall plans. Further, an archaeology and mitigation program has been established. Mr. Avi Buckles will be presenting that here shortly as well. This development provides greater buffers, building setbacks, and reduces the height more so than what is required by code. Again, it employs a clustered development that enhances the compatibility of existing land uses and the natural environment as it pushes everything closer to the roadways where it's more appropriate and preserves the natural amenities. This project allows the wash to be conveyed to Pima County Flood Control District, which allows a mechanism for regional flood control solutions. As encouraged by the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, this development will feature drought tolerant and low water use plant materials. And then the last and arguably one of the most important things I'd like to bring to your attention, Mr. Urino, is that the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan requires that the developer notify the neighborhood association and any property owner within 300 feet offering to meet with them to discuss the development package. And in this instance, part of that would be the flooding solutions that we have accommodated or accounted for on our site at least 30 days prior to submittal of the development package. So what I'd like to bring forth to you is, as we've been discussing the challenges of this site and the history of this site, one thing that, we've got to consider the chicken and the egg and where do we start? And so we have to gain that certainty and the level of assurance moving through the process that this can happen, that the development can occur. And that often happens, as you're familiar with, through this process, the rezoning stage. And so I just like you all to know that just because this is the rezoning, this does not mean that this is the last bit of it, because we are required as we move through the process into the next phase to go in and review the materials and our solutions, if you will, to all of the neighbors. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Brennan to describe the master plan of the resort and how this development aids in achieving that desired vision. So, Colin.
Thank you, Ms. Willett. But before you turn it over to Mr. Brennan, I need you to repeat for me what you understand the floodplain use permit to have reviewed and decided.
So it is my understanding that as part of this process, the floodplain use permit was applied for to allow staff to provide a mechanism for staff to review the technical studies that is often presented during the rezoning to gain the certainty that this is the solutions that we are proposing is satisfactory to move through the process, if you will. Is that correct, Linda? Bill?
So we submitted the floodplain use permit to put an active application in even before we were ready to do our site design and do the rezoning. So that got it in the system, and that gave that mechanism for staff to be able to do a full technical review of the floodplain situation, rather than doing that after we go in and propose something after the fact.
Well, so I'm just not understanding what staff has reviewed and what staff has approved. So when was the floodplain use permit? Because my understanding, and I could well be incorrect, was that the floodplain use permit was acquired solely for the purpose of permitting staff to review something in the future for approval or disapproval in the future as more information was presented by the applicant. Do I have that wrong?
Could we just bring Bill Carroll into this, because he
Yeah, of course.
is in that area, and I would love
Of
to
course.
have him. Thank you. Rather than us planners trying to talk hydrology.
Hi, this is Bill Carroll. I'm with Engineering and Environmental Consultants, 555 East River Road, Tucson, Arizona. Yes, the floodplain use permit was applied for because in determining whether or not this project was viable, there was a question of could there be an encroachment into the floodplain, not into the floodway, but into the floodplain that would allow a little bit more land to be built on than what is currently outside the floodplain. Lexi, can you move forward, or Linda, can you move forward to the map that shows the FEMA floodplain?
Keep going. Okay, you're all getting a preview of the other side.
Yeah,
Oops.
sorry.
There you go.
Okay, yeah, right there. So it shows a little island in there, which FEMA has said is not in the floodplain. And I'm jumping into some of the stuff I would have covered anyway, but this is fine. Zone A is potential floodplain that really has not had any detailed study. And that's the area that encompasses the southeast corner of this site. Zone AE is a 100-year floodplain that has had detailed engineering analysis. And so when we first started looking at the project, when the developer first started looking at the project, it was like, is that island the only viable piece of property that can be developed? And we said, no, probably most of Zone A could be developed as well, because there hasn't been a detailed study. And potentially there could be some encroachment to the north and west into the Zone AE, but the only way to determine that would actually be to go through the analysis and determine what kind of an impact would it have on the floodplain. Would it meet FEMA and City of Tucson standards that require no more than 1/10 of a foot rise, no more than a 1% increase in velocity? And so we did that analysis, and it was and I may not have been very clear in my at the last meeting. It was done as part of a very detailed hydraulic study. We created a Flow 2D model that actually looked at every 20-foot by 20-foot grid within the floodplain of the Agua Caliente Wash as well as the Tanque Verde Wash, and came up with an encroachment analysis. And once we came up with that, we said, yes, you could encroach a certain amount into those floodplains. And the potential buyer said, but how do we know that the city would agree with you? Sure, Bill, you're an engineer, you know what you're doing, but that's not enough confidence on our part. And so we approached the city and said, we'd really like to give you a courtesy copy of this for you to take a look at. And the only way to get them to be able to have the time to be able to actually review it was to submit a floodplain use permit. And so we submitted a floodplain use permit, gave them full documentation, digital copies of the model that we created, as well as all the documentation backup. And then they had time to be able to actually go through and look at it. And they confirmed with us that, yes, the encroachment that you're proposing, particularly along the Agua Caliente Wash, does not create adverse impacts to people that are surrounding property owners. And yes, we approve the floodplain use permit in that we have reviewed your documentation and we find that your grading solution and encroachment of the floodplain is acceptable. Does that help?
Yeah, that's more than I asked for, but I appreciate it. And
sorry.
no, it's quite all right.
You were
You
gonna
would
get it
forward that
later
anyway. And I have seen this map before, so I understand it because you did talk about the island in your
Yes.
last presentation. Here's where I'm still not quite understanding what you're saying. Are you saying then that city staff has already approved the development that's proposed on this property as being compliant with the floodplain ordinance? Or are you telling me, because I'm hearing two different things, but that could be me and not you. Or are you telling me staff had to generate a floodplain use permit so it had a file open so it could review the data you provided to it so they could tell you whatever they told you about your study and your findings? So which of those two things or something totally different happened?
Maybe somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
The staff basically said, we can't review this without your filing for a floodplain use permit. They did not look at it as a development. They looked at it purely as a grading exercise. If we brought in 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 feet of fill in these areas that we proposed to fill, and there was no longer the ability for water to flow across the edges of the property where it currently flowed, would it violate City of Tucson floodplain standards? Would it violate FEMA floodplain standards? And their response was, no, it would be fine. It would meet our standards for floodplain, not for development, just for floodplain.
So just to recap, and again, if I have it wrong, you tell me, okay? So they have not approved this particular development with respect to, they have not issued a floodplain use permit to go forward for this particular development. Is that true?
They have actually issued a floodplain use permit.
So
For
There was
this
never
particular
any-
development comprising 132 units on the parcel that we're looking at.
There were no units shown on what we gave them, but the area that was that includes those 132 units that we're talking about was the area that we showed to be raised, and they issued a floodplain use permit that would allow us that indicated that we could raise that land without violating the floodplain ordinance.
Well, those are two different things to me. And again, you can tell me if I'm wrong or right or somewhere in between. Whether, in the abstract, if I bring in a bunch of fill, will that get me out of the floodplain is one question. And the other question is, I want to build 132 units, more or less on this piece of property as defined by the preliminary development plan. And do I have a permit now from the City of Tucson to go out and do the grading and do the construction? Do I have that? Do you have that permit now, that floodplain use permit now that permits you to go out and do the building? In which case, how is that possible? Before rezoning, how is it possible that you have achieved the permission that I just outlined?
There was certainly no permission or permit issued that would allow us to do any construction of roadways, utilities, building units, or anything along those lines. I believe that a floodplain use permit would allow us to start bringing dirt in and place it in those areas that were deemed to be acceptable to have dirt placed in it. But the developer's intent was never to move forward. It was purely to get city recognition that, yes, the study that we were showing, the area that we indicated that we would propose to fill met the city floodplain ordinance. And that was all we were looking for.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Beal, I see you have your hand up. I'll go ahead and please ask you to speak, and then we'll go back to Ms.
Well,
Wells.
I just wanted to let you know that we do have from city staff, Lauren Makis from the PDSD engineering, if you have any questions or something that comes up that way as well too.
Well,
So,
I'd like to get clarity because I have to confess, and it's probably my limitations, not what Mr. Carroll is saying. If Mr. Makis could shed some light on the precise question that I'm trying to ask, please go ahead, Mr. Makis.
Thank you, Mr. Urino. My name is Lauren Makis. I'm a engineering reviewer for Planning and Development Services. I will try to correct the record a little bit from what Mr. Carroll said. In general, what he's saying is correct. In order for us to review an engineering study, we have to start a floodplain use permit. That gives us tracking, that gives us the ability to have the conversation, comments, and responses. The purpose for this one was actually twofold. There's one that Bill might not have been directly aware of, but working with staff from the Planning Center, part of the city's floodplain ordinance is the protection of riparian resources within the floodplain. So there was part of the study was to show which parts of this parcel of this area was effectively inundated by the 100-year event, which would mean that the riparian resources within the area would have to be protected. And then the other part is what Mr. Carroll is talking about is, yes, can they do this grading? Will it cause an adverse impact, which is the increase in water surface elevation or the increase in velocity? And then does this proposal meet the requirements of the city and FEMA? And our response is yes. Since there was no project associated with it, it doesn't give floodplain permission to do any work. It's basically a mechanism to give the development team some confidence that the approach is accepted, that the analysis meets the standards, and that there are areas outside of the effective floodplain. And by effective, I mean the area that actually will be flooded based on the current technology, which is the Flow 2D modeling, and not what is necessarily mapped by FEMA. Now, I know that there was a conversation. I'm going to jump a little ahead of you, sir. If you want to cut me off and ask me later, that's another thing. There was a conversation about requiring a conditional letter of map revision. And in our discussions, my discussions with staff from the Floodplain Administrator's Office, we feel that requiring that before the rezoning is approved by you and by Mayor and Council is a little bit premature, but that a CLOMR should be required and will be required before the actual development package is approved and work can begin on the project. So okay. I hope that answers your question a little bit better. And if you still have questions, I'm here.
Sure. So let me just go back for two right now. Why not get the CLOMR right now?
Part of that is the time it takes to get through FEMA. Another part is it was the opinion of the Floodplain Administrator's Office and PDSD Engineering that the technical requirements for the CLOMR really front loads the project until the fine grading is designed for this project. The CLOMR that would be proposed would not necessarily match what the project is going to be, and so part of the idea of a CLOMR is you get the CLOMR, and FEMA says if you do the development in this way and do the model this way, then once it's all done, we are likely to issue you a letter of map revision which removes it from the floodplain. But if the model that was submitted or the design that was submitted for the CLOMR differs in any significant way from what is actually approved at the end of the project, then they start the whole review process over again. So we felt like it was front loading the work that may have to be revised and undone as part of the final design of the subdivision once they actually are doing the fine design.
Okay, thank you. That helps me very much, Mr. Makes. The other question I had was, then, am I correct then that at present, the applicant does not have a floodplain use permit that would allow construction of the proposed units on the site?
That is correct. That is
And
correct.
there, in the future, there would have to be an application made, a review done, and an approval given for such a permit to issue.
That is correct.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Makis. Mr. Carroll, I apologize for interrupting your presentation, but I thought Mr. Beal might help shed some light on this, and Mr. Makis certainly has. So please go right back to where you're going, Mr. Carroll.
Actually, Lexi, do you want to back up to La Mariposa?
Yes, go ahead. The floor is yours, Colin.
Hey everyone, my name is Colin Brennan. So I'm filling in for my dad, Steve, who was unable to attend tonight due to his other job as an airline captain. I appreciate all of you guys attending this meeting and listening to our presentation. So a little about my family's history with La Mariposa. So we've owned and operated this facility since the early 90s, which is longer than I've been alive. And throughout that time, the facility has operated as a sports and fitness club and event center. Since its inception, the sports and fitness side has offered tennis, golf, swimming, and weight room amenities to the community. This portion of the business has also hosted a range of special events, which primarily include various tennis tournaments and cycling and running races. So on the venue side, we've hosted numerous events of all types. We've done over 3,000 weddings, countless quinceañeras, bar and bat mitzvahs, celebrations of life, expos, etc. We've become quite experienced at hosting beautiful events for the city, its community, the many, many guests who are fortunate enough to visit in attendance of these occasions. So one consistent complaint that we've heard over the years is the lack of lodging on this side of town, and more particularly on the site of La Mariposa. And I cannot emphasize enough just how often our guests have expressed this. So now I bring up this complaint and how active we are in hosting events to lead into my next point, which is our future plans for La Mariposa. So utilizing existing zoning, we have plans to majorly ramp up the facility. These improvements include condominiums and hotel lodging, a revamped gym facility, a resort-style pool, possible restaurant and bar, and a premium 18-court tennis facility. Through the lodging, we will finally be able to offer rooms for the countless guests who have visited Tucson due to our events. On top of that, this lodging will provide a conveniently located stay to anyone who wishes to visit East Tucson and appreciate the beauty it has to offer. Now, the resort-style pool facility and revamped gym will provide East Tucsonans and guests of La Mariposa with amazing amenities to take advantage of year-round. Now, lastly, we're really excited about the 18-court tennis facility. Why is that? That's because this size of facility is going to give us the capability to host large-scale USTA, which is United States Tennis Association tournaments. And with that, we're going to bring in numerous guests to Tucson from around the country and even around the world. So currently, we are ready to go through with these plans, and through the property's current zoning, we are entitled to do so. Not only will the sale to Casita development help us kickstart these plans by providing funding, we will also continually work with the developers to ensure a fluid design between the two projects. So, and myself as a young man, I've been born and raised in East Tucson. I'm a young man who truly appreciates the beauty that this side of town has to offer. And I'm also a young man who hears the complaints of my fellow East Tucsonans. I believe the approval of this development's rezoning and its continued cooperation with La Mariposa will provide new life into an otherwise stagnant part of town. All this while respecting and maintaining the beauty East Tucson possesses. And so before I go, there's one final matter I wanted to address. We know the subject of the dirt pile has become an issue. In regards to this, I wanted to clarify that the dirt was piled there for La Mariposa's use and was never intended to affect drainage or cause harm in any way. It was our mistake and it has since been removed. Thank you for your consideration on this, and I appreciate your time.
Mr. Brennan, thank you very much for your presentation, and you can tell your dad you did him proud tonight. Thank you.
Will do.
And Mr. Urino, before we jump on to the next member of our team, Mr. Buckles, to describe some of the archaeology stuff, I'd just like to clarify that while La Mariposa has entitlements, they would have to go through a development plan process for any of these improvements, which would have an evaluation of traffic as well as floodplain issues similar to what we would have to go through in the next phase of the site. So I just wanted to add that for you as well. Moving on, the next question, I just again wanted to provide picture evidence there to you that those piles have been removed, and then that's a perfect segue there for Mr. Avi Buckles there to jump on here and talk a little bit. So Avi, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Avi Buckles. I'm the Director of Cultural Resources at Westland Resources here in Tucson. I've been doing archaeology for over 20 years. Pretty much all I know how to do. That's where I started Mr. Brennan when I was a young man. So, I've been working on this project, kind of working with the developer, discussing it for well over a year here. I have a very large staff of archaeologists as well as tribal cultural consultants. Have extensive experience working on ancestral sites here in Tucson. And as expected in an area, right here near Agua Caliente Wash, near Tanque Verde Wash, there of course were Native Americans here in prehistory and of course later in time as well. But previous studies have been conducted on this property, including cultural resources surveys, as well as archaeological testing programs. And really at heart, there is, an archaeological site here that needs treatment. We are a qualified consultant with the city of Tucson, also permitted through the Arizona State Museum. Most of the archaeological site, as you could expect, where folks want to live now above the floodplain, that is where it's located. So the surveys happened, the testing programs happened. Really what we were going to do is work with the city of Tucson to develop what's called a data recovery plan. And this specifically specifies the excavation methods, the sampling strategy, and of course, most importantly, the recovery of ancestral remains from the area. This will go through City of Tucson review, through the Historic Preservation Office. Once the methods are agreed upon, the work would begin. I do want to note that unlike a lot of projects that I've worked on before, the developer here and the landowner really want to engage with tribes, especially the Town Adam Nation here in Tucson. This is their ancestral land, and we do plan on, having various engagements with them, involvement with them, from day one. Not only involvement with the archaeological excavations and any sort of burial recoveries, but also in honoring this place. It obviously has a very long history. We really like to work together with the local Atum community here to be able to develop public outreach, other things that would really honor this past. So really something unique. And as I mentioned earlier, I do have a large staff of archaeological folks who are tribal members. We would staff this project, and of course, I've worked with tribes for many years. All work would be done with the utmost respect and involvement of the tribes, as well as the City of Tucson Preservation Office. Obviously, I cannot show the exact location, of the archaeological site here. Suffice to say that dirt pile was not placed within the archaeological site and would not affect any sort of recovery or mitigation. You know, that's the main thing that we're planning on doing out there. Does anybody have any questions regarding proposed mitigation of resources out there?
Mr. Buckles, no, I do not. Thank you very much for your participation tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. And lastly, Bill, it's up to you now. Whatever you would like to add from your presentation that wasn't already, we can go to the next slide for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll skip through what I've already covered. As I said, we did do a very detailed study, and as Lauren Mick has indicated, the Flow 2D model is the type of model that the city would expect to see, that FEMA would expect to see, and we created a 20 by 20 grid of the entire Tanque Verde and Agua Caliente wash area, both sides of the wash adjacent to the property, to be able to address it. The first step we did was to take the FEMA documentation, flow depths, velocity, area of inundation, and we used that to calibrate our model, our Flow 2D model. Then we did encroachments, and we did several different encroachment studies. We looked at, you know, what would happen if we encroach to this point? What would happen if we encroach to this point? What would happen if we encroach to this point? And we kind of worked our way through it, because it's a trial and error method to be able to figure out how far could we encroach and still not exceed the FEMA and the City of Tucson floodplain requirements. Can you bump forward, Linda? Next slide.
Mr. Carroll, so what you just said, what you're doing then, as I take it, is you're seeing what's the geographic scope of the area you can develop by doing that? Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Go
Without creating adverse impacts to surrounding properties.
Right. Go right ahead.
And so this exhibit shows the maximum allowable encroachment that we came up with. That if we encroach to that dotted black line into the Agua Caliente wash, it still met FEMA and City of Tucson requirements of negligible increase in depth, negligible increase in velocity. We presented this to the planning center and the client, and we kind of kicked things around, and we said, that might just be a little too much. Thank you. And so on this slide, you see the red dotted line. That was what we came up with, that was the maximum allowable encroachment and still meet FEMA and City of Tucson flood control standards. You can see that we are not really anywhere near that. We have pulled back considerably from that area. All of that area between the red line and the detention retention ponds is going to be left in its natural state. And we did that to make sure that we were very conservative in terms of any of our analysis in terms of encroachment. And in fact, by pulling back, there is absolutely no increase in depth on the north side of the Agua Caliente wash. We realize that the people over there already have problems. Even 1/10 of a foot could be more than they can handle. There's always this fine line between how do we solve the problems, and we recognize that there are problems out there, and how do we develop this piece of property to not make the problems worse? And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do on this piece of property to solve the problems that people have in flooding out there. There are some solutions that could be done, but they're not our solutions. They're Pima County solutions. They could do some upstream regional retention, detention to slow the velocity, the rate of flow coming through the wash. They could widen out the wash. They could channelize the wash. I know nobody likes those words, but those would be the kinds of solutions that could, in fact, solve some of the flooding problems that existing homes, neighbors are having. But there's nothing that we can really do on our property because A, we're not allowed to do any work in the floodplain or in the floodway, which is the area that you would want to be able to do some work to be able to provide increased capacity through that area. But as I said, we pulled back our encroachment area and said, we're not going to take everything that we could take because we don't want 1/10 of a foot rise on the north side of the wash. So our plan is in those areas where you see the homes that we would be doing some filling. It's well inside of the area of the maximum allowable. We would do some soil stabilization along the edges of that fill, Haven't determined whether or not it's a rock or a riprap or a concrete or a soil cement, but we would want to make sure that the exposed slope would be stabilized so that there's no erosion problems up against those homes. And as I said, by doing it the way we've got it shown here with it pulled back, absolutely no increase in depth on the north side. There are 3 environmental section requirements that were included in the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan, and I'll just go through them very quickly. One was that dedication would be made to Pima County flood control for stream beds, stream banks, and 50 feet on either side of the same for the Agua Caliente. And the client is prepared to do that and more than willing to accept a condition of zoning that says that will be dedicated. Additionally, within the floodway zone, there will be no structures or fill would be allowed. Our client has absolutely zero intention of doing anything inside the floodway. And so putting that as a condition on a rezoning would be absolutely fine as well. And then finally, there's a requirement that says that the floodway of the Agua Caliente Wash and Tanque Verde Creek be dedicated as a flowage easement to Pima County. And we are absolutely fine with that. Because we do not plan on doing anything with that and are happy to dedicate that. So that's kind of where we're at. You had asked last time, and I thought I had answered it. Was a detailed hydrologic study done? Yes, absolutely. And it was reviewed by the city, and the city determined it to be acceptable. It was not a development package. I totally agree with Lauren. This was not something that said, oh yeah, you can go ahead and start building your units or paving roads or anything else. It was just a floodplain analysis that indicated that the amount of fill and what we submitted to Lauren was not the red dotted line. It was actually the line of what was anticipated for being disturbed. And it met the requirements of the city flood control ordinance.
So, Mr. Carroll?
Yes.
Not the red dotted line, but what?
Basically, the area that shows being disturbed within the planning center document.
Right.
Okay.
So where the little houses are plus the ponds.
Exactly, yes.
Right.
Yes. The one other issue is the whole issue of a clomer. It's always been our intention to get a clomer. You know, that sometimes the city or the county may not require a clomer. Clomer is a really good insurance policy. I don't want the developer to go out and build something and have FEMA have an issue with it. I know there's been back and forth conversation about whether or not the clomer should be done before the zoning is put in place. I totally agree with Lauren. Asking for the clomer to be done in advance says there's a incredible amount of engineering work that needs to be done in order to be able to have enough detail to submit a valid clomer request to FEMA. And asking that to be done before we even know if we're going to get a zoning seems excessive. But if that's a requirement in order to be able to get zoning approved, we've talked with the owner and the owner is willing to accept that.
Okay. I appreciate it. And, you know, it wasn't so much that your testimony was clear to me last time, but then I had available to me after the hearing your report as opposed to the excerpts from it in the application. And I noted that that you plan, if this goes forward, to do additional studies based on the actual buildings to be built, which makes sense, right? Of course you would.
Correct.
So I just, once I read the report and considered your testimony, I understood both why you would say in your report, further study will be done, and that your belief is that to date, detailed studies have been done.
Correct.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms.
That's all I've
Wallet,
got, unless you have
No, I have no
questions.
further questions. Ms. Wallet, anything further from your end?
I don't have anything further. We're here, all of us, for any available questions.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'm going to open it up to first, Mr. Latour. Are you present still?
Muted.
Mr. Latour,
Okay,
please
okay.
unmute and share with us what you
I'm
would like.
unmuted. Are we allowed to ask questions of Mr. Carroll and
No.
and Avi?
No, you can ask me,
Okay.
and if I think it's something that we need to explore, I'll go right ahead and ask him for you.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, then let
Well,
me
I
just,
didn't say
start.
that. I didn't say that with any disrespect or to suggest it's just not the way we do these things. Go ahead and say what you want to say and ask any questions you want, and we'll definitely get you answers. But it
All
just,
right, then
we
to
get
you,
mired down
you,
if we do
Mr.
too much of the back and forth.
To you, Mr. Iarino, then, Avi said that archaeological studies had been conducted on the property, but Lexi's letter of asking to reopen had a letter from the SWCA Environmental that said 34 archaeological studies had been done in the area, but none had been done on this property. Which are we to believe?
We'll get clarification for you before the end of the hearing. So go right ahead with your
Very
other
good.
remarks. You have to
All
start
right.
with your name and address just for the transcriptionist.
Please forgive me. My name is Vaughn Latour. I live in the Powderhorn Ranch subdivision. I'm vice president of the HOA there. Point one of Lexi's interpretation of Plan Tucson states that considering neighborhood stability is an important determining factor provided housing choices and improve the quality of life in the drainage. Her proposal, the very closest neighbors to this proposal is our Powderhorn Ranch, which is zoned SR1. She's proposing to take the very closest neighborhood to us, and now she wants to change it to the medium density, which is the most dense plan. It does not preserve our neighborhood, does not preserve our quality of life. The very opening paragraph of the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan states that plan's intent is to act as a guideline for assigning zoning classification and as a guide for the development. The very second paragraph of that states that the Bear Canyon neighborhood is characterized by low density or suburban ranch. We are the closest. We are the suburban ranch. So that's what we need to keep in there. I don't think we'd have as much problem keeping an SR1 zone in that area. We have a tremendous problem going to medium density. The second portion is that it is single family owner occupied with up to one dwelling per acre. On page 12 of the plan, it also states under the goal, a sub goal of encouraging development which is compatible with existing neighborhoods. This proposal is clearly not. Also, page 12 of the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan under goals, it states, and I quote, encourage a mix of housing types emphasizing single family owner occupied, end quote. The owner intends to give 325 memberships to their tennis club and health club to the rental properties. Therefore, they would have access to the Bonanza gate, and it would, as we've been saying straight along, affect the Bonanza tributary. It is impossible to get onto, to take a left turn on the street coming out to Houghton from about 2 o'clock on. So all of that property that wants to get onto Tanca Verde would now be channeled through the Bonanza Road plan, creating a hazard for the existing neighborhood. So second point to be contested is her point number 5, which states in her proposal that's to protect a natural water course, and to follow up with this point 7 on her proposal, that it presents a solution to a wicked and regional draining issue. On page 29 of the plan, it states it prohibits development within the 100-year floodplain of major washes. And further, on page 16 of the plan, under the heading of implementation, I quote, until such time as a detailed hydrological study is accomplished, no change in land use densities or zoning classification should be allowed except to reflect existing purposes. And then the plan goes on to state, the very next sentence says, and under no circumstances will any development be allowed in the actual floodway. Again, just the opposite of what this proposal is doing. It states that even with a hydrological study, no building would be allowed in the floodplain, and two, the bringing of fill is specifically prohibitive. Mr. Carroll stated in his last meeting that he didn't see any dirt at all. We had photographic evidence, and now the developer is taking this out. So obviously there was a problem. Mr. Carroll didn't get out of his car to look at it. The second thing we want to do is take a look at the floodplain issue. We had last Friday and Saturday, over a 24-hour period, we had about 1.25 inches of rain. I'm going to attempt to put this picture on, please. Can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Not quite yet, but it takes a minute to load sometimes.
This is a picture of 1 inch of rain coming down the Agua Caliente.
I'm not quite
Reaching-
seeing it yet, Mr. Latour, although maybe others are. There's probably a tab somewhere that says share screen.
All right, let me see if I can find that. I'm sorry.
No, you don't need to apologize to me about technology issues.
Well, let's see. The only thing there isn't a tab on here that says share screen, so I'm sorry, I can't share it. I did send it to you earlier. So it is on your email site, Mr. Iarino. I don't know if you can pull it up from there.
Okay, if you send it to me, I can see it, but I can't share it right now. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, that site shows after just 1.25 inches of rain that the banks of the Agua Caliente has flooded, and with only 1.25 inches of rain, it shows that water breaching the banks and heading directly for this area. I went further downstream of the ranch or of Houghton on Mr. Hulk and Mr. Rojas's property. I skinned up a tree on their property and showed the water. You can hear it.
Yeah, I could. Go right ahead, though. I'm listening to you now.
All right. And it showed the waters, again, breaching and tributaries running through there. The water was running extremely fast. That water that ran brought down about 15 inches of sand and debris onto the Bonanza Road where the wash crosses at. We contend that moving that amount of debris with just 1 inch plus of rain, which doesn't come anywhere close to what a monsoon would do, that changes the bed of the wash. You can raise it inches at a time. And if it's going to do that, then the wash, every time we have a flood, the bed and the banks, the relationship to them changes and makes it easier for it to flood. So what may be a dry island right now, by next summer, could well be right in the middle of the floodplain. Let me continue. Let's see. The La Mariposa acts as a buffer zone between Speedway Boulevard and the Powderhorn Ranch, making it impossible to allow low and medium density projects to occur. Powderhorn Ranch and the proposed development site is zoned SR1, suburban ranch with 1 unit per acre. It should be pointed out at this time that the Forest Grove and Bonanza Road, which was also known as Jones Road, they had signed the petition of 139 on our first petition and 101 on opposition. So on this second petition, those 2 petitions now have been filed with your office in opposition to this development. The development's supposed to be taking place with consent and working with the neighborhoods. It is not doing that. The signatures, the La Mariposa Resort additionally started putting out their own petition, which is certainly within their right to do, asking their members to sign and in favor of but pose to you that those are members. They are not landowners. They are not people that live in the area that are affected. And if they thought for a minute of those 325 additional memberships that are going to be printed, they probably would not sign the petition because their walk-in ability to play tennis or use the facility would now be hampered by an additional 325 members, which also, as I said earlier, would be forced to use Bonanza during any rush hour traffic. Mr. Carroll's talking about the detailed hydrological study. On his last meeting, he said, kind of danced around it and said that there had been a study done, but it was very preliminary and that a great deal more need to do. And then in asking you to reopen, he provides a 77-page study, which seems to me to be pretty detailed. So since the area is within FEMA and Pima County floodplain, dumping is prohibited by statute. FEMA will be very interested to hear that there has been dumping and removal, because both of which are illegal without FEMA permission. The archaeological sites, I really wanted Avi to be able to talk about that because he said it had been performed. And I'd like to be able to find out that when you bring in 70 piles of dirt that are 5 to 6 feet tall and then remove them, doesn't that really kind of hamper an archaeological study of that ground? It seems to me it would destroy any surface of the area, and indeed it did. All of the riparian plants that were there are gone now. All of the ground has been rolled over by dump trucks and loaders, and it looks like a parking lot in there right now. So for archaeological studies to have happened underneath that dirt, I find it really hard to believe. So, and also Lexi's letter on the SWCA environmental consultants, it also went on to talk about the Hohokam habitation and the prehistoric site that is less than a mile from us. We're very concerned about that. We also have pictures of artifacts that we've taken out, just planting trees, just putting in irrigation. We feel that there's probably a need for an on-site archaeological deal study, excuse me. So basically that's the gist of what I wanted to talk about. I'm very concerned about 10.5 acres of parking lot and buildings. We lose all the natural absorption of that ground during monsoons. So all of that goes directly into either the containment ponds that they're talking about, which, and it just don't seem to be adequate to take over any extra flood that goes on. When you have 1 inch of flood that puts out the amount of water that it did last week, we know we get 3 to 5 inch monsoons quite a bit. That's the picture right there of the entrance on Bonanza. The water's rushing through there pretty strong. So these are the things that we're concerned about. Once the flood waters receded, we had about 15 to 18 inches of mud there. So, and dirt. Climate change is going to make this worse, gentlemen. We're going to have more severe storms. They're going to move more water and more debris. And with a development like this being raised 3 to 5 feet out of the current floodplain, it only means that will act as a dam that will then force any of this water into the Powderhorn Ranch, which is just absolutely unacceptable. We've done the calculations ourselves. 1 acre foot of water is 325,850 gallons. They're going to proceed with their plan to raise that by 3 to 5 feet. A 3 foot flood, which this property has been under twice in the last 30 years. A 3 to 5 foot flood would be almost 10.5 million gallons of water, which would be forced into the Agua Caliente Wash and into the Powderhorn Ranch subdivision. We are opposed to this. All members of our community, the Forest Grove community, and those along Bonanza are in very steep opposition to this and beg you to not allow this proposition to go further. Mr. Iannarino, I appreciate your time. Thank you for the floor.
Mr. Latour, thank you for your participation. And as I said, I will ask Mr. Buckles at the end of other speakers to answer your question on the archaeological piece. Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing the videos, which I think we all were able to see.
Thank you.
All right. So next, I'd like to call on Mark Weigel. If I pronounced that correctly, I'm happy. If I haven't, I apologize. Mark, are you with us? Okay, we'll come back to Mark. If he's with us, we'll check him later. Jane Rojas, Ms. Rojas, would you please start with your name and address and then go ahead and tell us what you'd like to tell us?
Hi, this is Jane Rojas. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jane Rojas. I live at 10024 East El Poso Trail, which is in Powderhorn Ranch. We own 2 lots under our names, and then we own the lot next door, which is 10036 East El Poso Trail. Those 3 butt up against Mr. Roland Hoke's properties, and his property and our properties run right up against the Agua Caliente Wash, and we have been highly impacted by floods in the past. One that Vaughn Latour took pictures of. We have pictures ourselves of the flooding that occurred. It was bank to bank, and because La Mariposa has built up their side of the property right by their road going right into the tennis place resort, that water came towards us. And again, it was a very low amount of water, 1.25 inches, and it flooded and it came onto our property. We have pictures of it coming onto our property. Their side of the wash has about a 2 to 3 foot embankment that they've created from illegal dumping. In the place where it came on our property, the bank is now about and that water came up over it and into our land. We didn't have flooding this time. We have had flooding 2 or 3 times in the past that's come all the way up to our house. When we built our house in 1982, they made us build up, the Corps of Engineers made us build up 3.5 feet, and the floods have come all the way to the home, up 2.5 feet of that 3.5 feet. So the flooding is not only possible, it's probable, and it has indeed occurred in the past. I submitted my report and I talked last time. I won't go over all of those details, but your denial was based on 2 main premises: that the plan was not in accord with the Plan Tucson, nor was it in compliance with and I reiterate that that is still the case. They are saying to take the SR1 to medium density right next to us, which will increase the flooding, but it also doesn't go with the density of the neighborhood. And that's why we were able to go, we literally knocked on doors and were able to get all of our neighbors to disagree and to protest this rezoning. It doesn't follow the surrounding density of at least 1 acre per home. It doesn't, in compliance with the single family owner occupied dwelling, as the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan. There are questions on the archaeological. Mr. Roland Hoke submitted a very detailed analysis of what has been going on. And again, even with a CLOMAR that allows this, and even with all of that, it still does not allow to put in medium density right next to us in our neighborhood, to rezone, to do something that's completely against the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan doesn't make any sense, even if they got the Clomar before the permit was allowed. And Lexi made a very interesting argument, really important to move from the transition from the Mariposa to where they're going to right up to Houghton, and how we need to make that not just single family SR1, but we need to have it transitory into more development. There was a great article in Sunday's paper that said that Arizona is one of 7 states that prohibit local governments from enacting mandatory inclusionary zoning through state statutes and the Private Property Rights Protection Act. So there's no precedent. Arizona should not allow this argument that, oh, we need to allow more housing, multifamily housing, and that's the way we make Tucson a better place. Not allowed. We're one of 7 states that prohibit that. We've got it in writing that says what our rights are, and that is SR1, and to keep with the neighborhood the way it is now. There's no justification. The flooding will cause damage. If those people who are arguing that we're not going to get flooded, I'd like them to put up a bond that when we do get flooded, we can go to them and they can bail us out for the damage that they're going to cause. I think that this needs to be denied as you had the first go around. I think it's incredibly serious, and it goes against and the new arguments that they've come up with in no way change, nor should it change your original finding. Thank you, Mr. Reno. I appreciate the time.
Thank you for your participation, Ms. Rojas. Mr. Oyen? James Oyen?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is James Oyen. I live on 1930 North Bonanza. I've been here since '92. I've experienced numerous floods, and the flood, the pictures that was recorded just recently is probably a small type of flooding that I've experienced over the years that I've lived here. They talked about the Bear Canyon plan. They talked about rental units. They talked about, limiting access to Bonanza. But, the Bear Canyon plan, it says, and it discouraged additional traffic into developed subdivisional areas, which is obviously Bonanza. And then Mr. Brennan talks about a hotel, additional condominiums, additional traffic. I mean, we're talking about probably thousands of vehicles that will use Bonanza as their ingress and egress. The Bear Canyon plan says preserve the integrity of established neighborhoods. Powderhorn's established neighborhood. Why are we changing all this? Is there a different set of Bear Canyon neighborhood plan that Lexi is referring to? I would like to, compare what she has to what I have. Again, the flooding issue that's been talked about, I don't disagree. They talked about, Mr. Carroll talked about no erosion problems with the new homes regarding flooding. That's great. I'm glad he's protecting those new homes, but what about the existing homes and the existing neighbors that are here that don't have any protection? What is he going to build? A dike? A flood control gate? What is he going to do? They have the ability to make something really extravagant, but that is to protect these condos, these rental units, which go against the Bear Canyon plan. Again, the flooding comes down, Agua Caliente, because upstream improvements, it hits the Mrs. Lee's equestrian preserve, this area where they it turns into sheet flooding. The water slows down and it spreads out, floods everybody's home. They talked about putting in a gate at Bonanza. which will have members only. Well, I wonder if how many of these memberships will be given to the new rental units in this area. You know, we're talking about thousands of people coming down to Bonanza, and the gate will slow them down. But again, the encouragement is to use Bonanza, not Houghton, because of the speed bumps that Mr. Brennan has put in years ago that are very, very severe. You can't go over them more than 1 mile an hour. Otherwise, you'll wreck your car. I'm adamantly opposed to this rezoning. It goes against the Bear Canyon plan. It's all about profit. Mr. Brennan has this property and he can sell homes. I think it was Mr. Garcia talked the last time about he's building his dream home. He's probably dumping about $1 million into that home. And now he's going to have high density housing right behind him. How is that fair to that individual to build a dream home and have rental units right behind you? That's not fair. This is about money. This is about this. They don't care about the individual homeowners in this area. They don't care about the riparian preserve. They don't care about the wildlife. It's all about money. That's what it is. And if this decision to move forward with this rezoning, it boils down to the fact, let's make Tucson just like Los Angeles. Let's pave it over. Let's get it concrete. Get rid of these trees and this dirt. Let's get it profitable, because that's what it's about, is profit. Tucson is not that way. Tucson's not Phoenix. It needs to be a nice neighborhood that people have invested in. I plead with you to stay with your original decision, because that's what the right thing to do is. These people have lots of money. I'm not a archaeologist and I'm not a professional, but these people are, and they have a good basic argument. But you know what? I've picked up Indian marbles off my property and pottery shards. But you know, if you dump 50 yards of dirt on top of this dirt and then you scrape it off and you run over it with dump trucks and backhoes, that basically takes all these little pottery shards and turns them into dust. Was that done by design? That would be my question for Mr. Buckles, I think is what his name was. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. We have 2 more people who emailed in, and then I will take others in the audience. So please just be patient. Mr. Hoke, or Hawk, Roland Hawk. Okay, we'll come back. Mr. Burns, Jim Burns.
Good evening. My name is James Burns, and I reside at 9892 East Forest Grove Loop. And Mr. Iorino, I thank you for letting me speak. I did submit a written comments to you about this meeting tonight. But over the New Year's weekend or the holiday, I personally went around to every home on Bonanza and in Forest Grove. I was only able to contact 24 of the owners. Every single one of them is opposed to this development and to the likelihood that they will be using Bonanza as a egress and exit from their development for the reasons that have been specified and addressed by other people tonight. Many of those people that I talked with and obtained their signatures are attending this meeting. And we rely, our neighborhood relies on Bonanza to get to our house. There's no other way to do it. You have to come down Tankerverde and enter onto Bonanza and drive to our homes. There are only 30 homes. Some are SR1. Forest Grove has a higher density. There are 20 homes in Forest Grove. But That's all that there's going to be is those 30 homes. And this development will drastically and forever change the character of our neighborhood. We know that regardless of any signage at Tanque Verde and Bonanza that says Bonanza is no outlet. In fact, there's a dead end sign on my house. And in the video that we saw of the wash where it says dead end in 317 feet, excuse me, should have some water. But in any event, it's not a dead end because people use Bonanza to access Houghton to avoid the stoplight at Tanque Verde and Houghton. I've seen delivery trucks, you know, of the Amazon type truck, drive straight down Bonanza, go through the wash. I followed them and they go straight out to Houghton and make a right turn on Houghton because there's no light there. I believe that the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan states that the neighborhood can only be accessed by arterials, Houghton Road or Tanque Verde. And if you approve this zoning, our neighborhood will be accessed by now 3 arterials, Houghton Road, Tanque Verde, and Bonanza. The owner of the current property that is being sold to be developed into these casitas is the same owner as the person who owns the Corta La Mariposa private road and the La Mariposa Club. And that individual has put up in his lobby of his exercise facility that he's searching for comments from his members, asking them to support this rezoning. And in his notice, he says, oh, by the way, I'm going to give them, or they're going to receive free membership into the club. So now Lexi, Ms. Welcott said that, oh, we're going to put up this gate and it's going to have a clicker to go in and out. Well, if all of the residents of that casita village are given access, they're going to have clickers. And guess what? They're going to go, regardless of any signage that they put up that says no, you know, left turn only to get onto Houghton, they're going to go right. There's no other way to get to the club, unless you're going to walk, but it might be raining. They're going to drive. So it's just ludicrous to believe that those residents of the 130 or 160 units, depending upon which person you listen to, that they're not going to be using Bonanza. And Bonanza is a quiet street. It has a wash that floods routinely during the monsoons. We had 2 swiftwater rescues on the Bonanza Wash this summer. And so the people that live here drive slowly and into the neighborhood. The people that don't live here don't. They're in a hurry to get someplace. And so I would urge you to uphold your previous decision and deny this rezoning. And if there's a recourse, I believe the recourse should be that Bonanza be permanently and totally closed to any traffic other than traffic entering from Tanque Verde Road. That would preserve our neighborhood. I listened to Mr. Brennan talk about the events that they host. I live on the corner of Forest Grove Loop and Tanque Verde. They hosted a year and a half ago the bicycle race up to Mount Lemmon. They closed their entrance off of Houghton Road. And so cars began streaming down Bonanza the day before the event so that they could park their cars and then leave for the bicycle race. Those cars continued the entire night. I'm telling you that it sounded like a freight train going past my house. And now he says, we're going to build this tennis court, these tennis courts, and in fact, it's going to be approved by the professional, I don't remember the names, but the Professional Tennis Association, so that we can hold tournaments here. My God, how are they going to get there? They're going to come down Bonanza unless that gate is closed. And so as a condition of rezoning this property, that gate has to be closed. And since he's the current owner of this property that's being rezoned, I don't see that that's a problem. And so don't get me excited, any more excited than I am. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and so that you have a sense of how the people in this neighborhood feel. I also know, because I used to be on the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association board, that the board it has in fact not met in over 2 years, and it is defunct. I spoke with the current president, although he's not had any meetings, and he said he's not had any meetings. And he was not notified that this development was going in according, and I would assume that the president of the BCNA would have received a letter, but he didn't. Anyway, so thank you very much for letting me speak. I don't think I can talk anymore anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Get some water. Mr. Lee?
Hi. I
Hi.
hope you can all hear me.
We can.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to jump in front of Mr. Sitzman.
We'll get to Mr. Sitzman next.
Okay. So I'm not sure. It's the first time I use Microsoft Teams, and I try to show you guys the video, a small clip that I made of the water. Did you all you saw it?
That came through, yes.
Okay, great. So my name is John Lee. I live at 1901 North Bonanza Avenue, which is right across from the La Mariposa gate at the end of the street. So not more than maybe 100 to 200 yards from the gate. And I've been living here. I'm going into my 11th year. And I'll try to be quick. I just wrote down 3 words here. And I'm the type of person who likes to keep things simple. The 3 words are flood, ecosystem, and traffic. And everybody here has touched somehow about these 3 things. I just want to say 3 quick things. Everybody from the project side in this discussion had one thing in common that they all touched, okay? They all touched about the stability of the neighborhood. So my question to them is, do you think our neighborhood is not stable now that you have to come in and make a huge change? I always thought that the word stability, by definition, it's something that it's stable, that it's level, that it's good as it is. What makes you think that making such a huge change in the ecosystem, you're going to maintain something that is already stable? By that definition, that is self-contradictory. Stability versus big change. It's stable the way it is. The forces of nature, well, we have to deal with the forces of nature, but we don't need a human-made project to come in and promise stability when it's already stable. I think that when you make statements in common, everybody on the other side, on the side of the project, brought up stability. Why is it not stable now that you have to come in and make a huge change? Okay, Mr. Brennan said more than once that he's a young Tucsonian. Okay, I've been here for 11 years. Okay, he also said, expressed how much he cares about the Tucson community and his neighbors. then how come we've been tortured by the loud music from his resort consistently year after year? Even when one of my neighbors had a newborn who underwent surgery, was he so effective and concerned with the neighbors at that time? It's been 11 years that I've been here and nothing has changed. We still hear the loud music from the resort on weekends. Fine, he's concerned about the happiness and well-being of the community within his resort, the people who go to the wedding receptions. But I didn't hear him talking about the happiness and stability of the neighbors around his resort. And traffic. I've been personally almost being run over by cars, by young people driving, zipping down the street so that they wouldn't miss their workout appointment or something. I'm just making that up. But the true fact is this, that I was almost hit twice in 11 years. And one time I actually had to jump off to the side of the road. Now, bringing in 170 plus households with their inhabitants with 1 to 2 cars average per household, and they zip down the street during day, then at nighttime. So how do you plan to maintain stability by making such a change like that? And everything that we offer, every project, whether it's in science, in real estate, traffic, every change has its negative points. I've heard the other side about talk about all the possible advantages, which I don't buy, but nobody touches. I would like to ask you, what do you think? What are the negative points of your project? So having asked that question, I'm going to turn my mic off.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Seitzman?
Hello. I live at 2360 North Bonanza Avenue. I've been here for 28 plus years. I live right at the corner of Tanque Verde and Bonanza. And so I just want to add a few points. Jim Burns and several others have already rehashed what I was going to say, but I'm going to hit a couple things. Number one, I thought it was a diversionary tactic from Lexi to say that they're going to, give limited access to the gate there. I stopped into La Mariposa. I was a member there for about 25 years. I know Colin. It's a nice family. No problem there. But I went into Mariposa on Sunday, and they've got a big drawing up there of the plan, and it's clearly states that all the members will have, all the new tenants will have memberships, so they can, make their okay. So all that means to me is that they're going to give 300 people clickers to the gate so they can have access to run down Bonanza. Okay, that's my first point. That's unacceptable. It's a diversionary tactic. Number two, I don't know how many if anybody from that group with Lexi has ever driven down Bonanza, but Bonanza is essentially a 1-lane road, 1.5 lanes at best. It's interesting what Mr. Lee said, because we walk down Bonanza a lot. In fact, a lot of people use Bonanza from Castle Rock, from Powderhorn, from different areas because we have a wildlife preserve at the end of the street. And you have to be ready to jump out of the way of traffic. If you're with a dog, you have to, because there's only one lane, or 1.5 lanes. So as they proceed north or south down Bonanza, somebody's got to stop, somebody's got to move. And many times it's the pedestrians who are walking who have to do the moving. And I'm going to go back to what Mr. Lee said, and that is because people who don't live on this street speed down this street. It's a 1-lane street, and they speed down this street all the time. When my daughter was 3 or 4 years old, we were standing out front on our driveway, and a car came around the corner excessively fast, almost ran into her front yard, and would have almost killed my daughter and myself, just missed us by inches. And that's how people drive down this street who don't live here. is very respectful. It's a very respectful community. Forest Grove, the few people, there's only 5 or 6 homes that are even on Bonanza. So, you know, it's a big problem for us. It's a huge problem for us because this street is not built for even what it's doing right now. Okay, it's so limited in capacity that it can't even handle what's going on right now. And that, you know, and for anybody who doubts that, just come and take a drive down here and take a look. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that. You know, we're a residential community, just like, you know, Powderhorn. I mean, we're part of Powderhorn. And so we are very worried about our property values too. If we have cars running up and down the street, speeding down the street, lines of traffic both ways, what's that going to do to our property values? You know, we cherish this land. We cherish these properties. We purchased here 28 years ago for a reason. And I'm sure that's exactly why the Rojas's and Rolly Hawk and the whole group, why everybody purchased here, because of the environment we were in. So I know I'm rehashing a few things, but I appreciate you letting me take the time to speak, and I hope that you will deny this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Sitzman. Mr. Augst?
Yes, hi, I'm Augie Augst. I live at 9841 East Forest Grove Loop in the Forest Grove community. I'm currently the president of our HOA here. And thank you for giving me the chance to speak this evening. And I also spoke when we had the initial hearing a couple weeks or a month or so back. But immediately what comes to my mind is, golly, you know, what has really changed between then and now? And in my opinion, nothing other than, you know, Mother Nature has once again reminded us of the folly of building in this area of Tucson without respect to the natural terrain. And again, several other speakers this evening, Jim, Dr. Lee, and others, you know, we had a very mild rain, if you will, back over the New Year's weekend. And what was amazing was the only wash in our area in East Tucson that had any water was the Agua Caliente. Tanque Verde was dry. Bonanza Wash was dry. But it's so unpredictable here. Yet I have photos, and my wife took video. We were driving around that Sunday morning. I think it was a Sunday. There were rapids, and it was like, golly, you could have sold tickets for you know, rafters to go down the Agua Caliente. That's how rough it was at the Bonanza crossing. And we saw this evening a video of the same day. It was a couple hours later in the day. The water had settled down, but what I want to be sure is everyone recognizes the breadth, the width of what that wash was. There was a sign, a street sign off to the corner, and it said, I think someone here can give me the exact number, but it's 317.9 feet from that point to where you run in to the fence post at the corner of La Mariposa. And that sign was well down the road yet. And what I'm getting at is the width of that wash running swiftly was well over 400 feet. At the opposite end of Bonanza, just about 100 yards or so south of Tanque Verde is another wash that we never talk about. It's called the Bonanza Wash, because I've never seen the name printed on a map anywhere. But you know, that map or that wash last summer had several cars stuck. It's a much narrower wash, but it's far deeper. But now switch gears with me. We saw a presentation this evening that showed, and I'm going to look at it on my computer, okay, because I took a snapshot. There was the Zone AE and the Zone A, and there was this new island that was highlighted in that presentation from the developer that, oh, that island is higher than the floodplain. Well, that's a really nice idea, but what if you live on that island when it is flooding? Your wife is pregnant. She needs to go to the hospital. We got to get groceries. I got to get the kids to the store. Sadly, people have to do things. And if I lived in a development that knowingly put me on an island, I'd be a little bit upset, okay? Let's go to another slide that we showed earlier this evening. And it was the future development concept for La Mariposa. And to the extreme upper left-hand corner of that slide was a big parking lot next to the proposed tennis center, which, boy, that really sounds nice. And I don't dislike the ideas, but the practicality, the logistics, and the trafficability challenges are significant. What they are proposing is, let's increase the traffic pressures on Bonanza that already you just saw live video of a bridge that's going to be over a 400-foot expanse, and an engineer would insist it be significantly larger, and I would agree with them as a civil engineer, that would probably have to be at least 2 lanes to now get access to this world-class tennis center facility. And oh, by the way, we forgot about the other wash at the end of Bonanza, just a little bit south of Tanque Verde, called the Bonanza Wash. That would be another 2-lane bridge that would have to be built to accommodate the safety of these people coming to these events and things. Not to mention, again, if I lived on the island of the casitas of La Mariposa, I just want to get out to Houghton Road, which is my primary access to go to Safeway or whatever I need to do. What do I do when it's raining outside and everything's flooded and I live on the island? I chuckled. I was talking to my wife. It's like, we don't get a lot of snow in Tucson on the ground, and we certainly don't get a lot of icy roads in Tucson. It does happen. But, you know, we could have our own little I-95 thing happen on this side of town if we put too many people in too dense of an area that's surrounded by washes that Mother Nature teaches us every year. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Nothing has changed since we talked about this the last time. It just doesn't strike me as being the smartest thing for any of us to condone or approve. You're trying to put too many people in too dense of an area surrounded by very precarious waterways. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Aries?
Mr. Urino?
Welcome. Start with your name and address, please.
Philip Aries. I think that Linda Morales, we've been in communication with the owners of La Mariposa, and we've been having a sidebar discussion, and we have a compromise specifically related to Bonanza Road. But I think I'm going to defer to Linda because, you know, she's more experienced at these things, but just say that we hear you and we understand. So I'm going to turn the mic back over to Linda and Lexi and let them propose or offer up the compromise on Bonanza Road, if that's okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Aries. Before we do that, Ms. Morales and Ms. Willett, I just want to make sure that Mr. Hawk, did you want to speak? Okay. And Mr. Weigel? Hearing no one right now on those, Ms. Morales or Ms. Willett, would you like to go ahead? And I still owe Mr. Latour an answer from Mr. Buckles.
And we'll circle back around to make sure that Mr. Buckles answers Mr. Latour's question regarding the impacts of those dirt piles on the archaeology findings, and then clarify the process of what happens when you go through some of these processes here. So a couple things to just clarify. We're going to tag team these here, Linda and I. So one thing that I'd like to clarify, that we are not proposing to change the medium density designation established by the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. As far as I can tell, the area that we are looking to develop, as well as the resort, has been designated since the plan was produced in the 80s. And there's no evidence suggesting in the document, and perhaps John Beal, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're aware of something, but these land use patterns have been suggested since the neighborhood plan has been produced there. Secondly, I'll turn it over to Linda to address the gates, but I want to just real quick address some of the flooding. Again, this is a large problem. As we are all aware, there's the Agua Caliente is a floodway that has no solution to it currently, and us going through this process presents a solution that truly does create a regional solution. And by that, I mean that by us going through this process, we are conveying one of the last set of property that is still in private ownership, aside from those individuals who own the property north of the Agua Caliente. Us and those who are north of the Agua Caliente are the last piece that privately owns the wash. And so by us going through this process, that will be dedicated to Pima County Flood Control, which will allow them to have some regulation on that floodway on both sides, the east and the west, because they already own that property. So I just wanted to add that piece of information as well, that now we are creating a contiguous area, if you will, for Pima County to maintain and manage the flooding situations out there. So Linda, if you want to address.
Yeah, so some clarifications on the gate, and we've heard the concerns, and we certainly don't want to increase any traffic and cause any additional problems on Bonanza. We do have the access directly out. We want our residents to use that solely. Yes, the residents would get the passes to be able to use the club, but what they would not get is the transformer, the transmitter, to be able to use the gate. So they can come in, they can use the resort, but they would not be able to pass through that Bonanza gate. The only members that would be able to have that access are the people that are already members today, not the new ones. So that's an important part of that. And I think Lexi had said authorized users. That's what we meant by authorized users, people that are currently part of that. And that number is considerably less than the 300 that was talked about if we add the additional apartment, the additional casita dwellers in there.
Ms. Morales?
Yes.
So where is the gate going to be?
Let me pull it back up. We'll share our screen again.
I saw the nice picture of the gate, but it didn't really help me identify where geographically it was located.
We've got it on the map as well.
Okay.
So kind of pointed out.
Oh, I think this isn't the right one.
Uh-oh.
Oh yeah, it is. Sorry.
Yep. One more, right? No, it's right. Oh, it's right there. Okay, so can you see Lexi's or see our cursor? So yes. The gate comes in, and that is the gate that you go past the. Yeah, it's over near the Height Memorial. If you're familiar with that.
Yeah, sure. I've been out to the property.
Right. No, I know. Yeah. Yeah. So the residents would only be able to come in and go into the resort before that gate. So exiting the resort, you either have the choice of going to Corte Vista La Mariposa to the east, or if you have that clicker, have that transponder, you can go out that gate and go up through Bonanza.
Okay.
And so then the other things that we heard that we could potentially assist with, As far as the resort and this development collectively is if additional speed bumps would be desired by the neighborhood along Bonanza to further deter and kind of, if you will, put it on an equal playing ground with the speed humps that we've heard on Corte Vista La Mariposa. There is a program, as I'm sure you know, Mr. Urino, that you have to go through and get signatures from the city in order to approve those on a public street. But we would assist and support that effort. The resort would, as if that's desired. And then the final concession that we talked about that we would like, oh, and I think Mr. Aries has something else he wants to add after I get done speaking here, but as the resort develops, they would be willing to discuss addressing the closure of the gate after that new development is approved and the expansion of the resort. Now that is frankly off-site of our rezoning. It's a separate property, so I'm not sure how that would become a condition, but we could talk about that, Mr. Urino. Philip, did you have something else you wanted to add? And I apologize, we've been doing this via text with these days of electronics, so hopefully I got his message correct.
Hello, Mr. Urino.
Mr. Aries.
I just wanted to, and it's unfair to Linda and Lexi to have to convey messages by text on the fly. So I wanted to just emphasize what they were saying, that our residents will not have access to the gate. They very well may join the club at La Mariposa Resort, and we encourage them to join the club at La Mariposa. But our residents will not have access to the gate. That's and we will guarantee that however we can. But the other thing is that the Brennans and the other owners of La Mariposa have agreed that as they move forward with their development plan, part of that plan will be the total closure of Bonanza. And they have very real, very concrete plans about how they would like to move forward with the development of their resort. And they will include, as part of their development plan on the record, that Bonanza Road will be totally closed to everyone from their resort. At this point, for our rezoning, we will guarantee that only existing members of La Mariposa will have access to that gate. And our residents will be prohibited from accessing the gate.
Even if they join?
Even if they join, that does not, and we'll have to figure out some way to memorialize that, but it is not our intention that our residents, by joining the club, would circumvent this process. And
I appreciate your remarks. On the other piece, Mr. Aries, what do you understand the timing to be of the La Mariposa owners' proposed new development, a part of which they would commit to closing Bonanza access?
Well, I know that they're actively in the design phase of it, conceptual design. Their master plan was put up earlier in the presentation. So, I mean, they're at the beginning stage of that process, but they're willing to commit that as part of that, they will close Bonanza Road entirely. I mean, their access to Bonanza Road, obviously everyone who lives there would still use it, but they would not have any additional, they would not have, no longer use, and Bonanza Road is their historic access to the resort.
Okay, I appreciate it. Anything further, Mr. Aries?
No, I know that Avi has some closing remarks on the archaeological, so, and I know he's hanging tight. So I want to make sure that that question was answered. And I really appreciate what Linda and Lexi have been doing. It just was, I wouldn't have chimed in other than it was just too many texts going back and forth to ask them to represent it. Wasn't fair to them.
It's good to have clarity. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna hang up. Thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate the process.
Mr. Buckles, can we ask you to respond to Mr. Latour's question from earlier?
Absolutely, sir. Mr. Latour, no, thank you for your questions. And I do want to point out that the archaeological study is a process. There's first the survey, the identification, where you can see things on the surface. That's followed by testing, where you do test excavations to identify the extent of the old dwellings, the old burials, and the old cooking pits. The survey has been conducted and the testing as well. What we're talking about doing is full recovery, going in there, identifying all those features that have already been found, the dwellings, doing the right thing, excavating them, making sure we recover all the human remains. That's the process that we're talking about. The SWCA letter you're talking about would reference some very basic records, not the full records that we've gone through and looked at and have the reports for. So it's really a process, and what Mr. Aries is talking about doing, hiring us to do, is to recover. It's called data recovery. We have archaeologists, tribal monitors go in there, excavate the old dwellings, remove the remains, do full data recovery. I believe that answered all of your questions also, and I do want to again clarify that dirt was not within the site boundary. Okay, any sort of work, we would come in first where the site actually is. We would clear it before any construction work happens. Obviously, that's one of the stipulations of city regulations. And hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Mr. Buckles. Ms. Willett, Ms. Morales, anything further?
I think we wanted to give Bill Carroll one last chance to discuss any other comments that came up.
That's fine, because I wanted him to clarify his remark that the applicant was willing to do the clomer now. You're on mute, Mr. Carroll.
And I pride myself on not being one of those people that does that. Yes, that is what I said. We had this conversation earlier today. That if that is a condition of zoning, we can live with that. I don't want to diminish any of the comments that were made by any of the neighbors. I truly understand that Agua Caliente is a significant flooding problem, and there should be nothing done to make it worse, and there should be something done to solve the problem. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to be able to solve the problem. We have a little piece of property on the south side of the wash. The people who are capable of making a difference on that wash is Pima County, and we would be more than willing to work with Pima County and the neighbors to try and help with solutions for that. The most we can offer on this project is that anything that we are proposing to do will absolutely not impact anybody on the north side of the wash adversely or at all. That any improvements that we will make, any encroachment that we would make, would only impact essentially our property.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. So here we are at the end, and I see we have some hands up from folks we've heard from, which is okay. I would ask that you keep any remarks solely targeted to anything new that was said by the applicant. And I won't take credit for doing this, because normally we'd be done right now. But I believe in full participation. So if you have something you would like to tell me, that responds specifically to something that was said by Mr. Buckles or Ms. Willett or Ms. Morales or Mr. Carroll in their last remarks, then let's go right ahead. Mr. Lee, let's start with you.
Okay, I don't think anybody has touched this subject. Nobody has talked about what's on the other side of the river that I showed you on the video. The east side of the road is the Isabella Wildlife Reserve. Isabella Lee, no relation to me, many years ago donated several tens of acres to the county with a premise that they wouldn't build on it. Now, I would like to know if anybody from the project side was at Isabella Lee Wildlife Reserve 5-7 years ago, and then recently, because there has been a major archaeological geographical change in the past 5-7 years. And it's very obvious for those of us who have been living here for 10 years plus, that walkway of Bonanza into the wildlife reserve was no more than maybe 4 to 7 feet wide, and its widest range. And now it's as wide as a street. And what happened to the pool? What is the pool? The pool is basically a gigantic hole in the ground, was basically a dry lake most of the year. And what happened to it? I would like to know from the project people. What happened to it 5 to 7 years ago with one of the major floodings? Now, let me point out that on the video, you saw the water running from the left of your screen to the right of the screen. What's on the left of the screen? The Mariposa gate. It is coming from that direction onto the wildlife reserve. And nobody's blaming Mother Nature, but the county even posted on the bulletin board as you walk into the wildlife reserve, this is a restoration project that has been going on for many years. And what happened within 1 year of restoring that pool, because it collapsed, the walls of that lake collapsed. So what did they do? They installed major tubes, gigantic tubes, to drain the water from one side to another. I went back a week later, and what happened? All those tubes were floating around. So this was a major restoration project by the city that totally failed within a week. And now you are promising us that you are gonna keep this neighborhood stable, which is already stable, and you're gonna make these major changes and make promises that it's gonna work?
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Howard?
Yes, Tom Howard, 1900 North Bonanza Avenue, 23 years as a resident of Bonanza Avenue. First of all, I'd like to say what happened to Mr. Brennan tonight, that he put his son on here instead of telling us what a great job they're doing down there. I can tell you for sure, and Dr. Lee and several other people, we've had 1 o'clock in the morning parties, Friday nights and Saturday nights forever. And they're telling us what wonderful neighbors they are and how they're going to help our community. Absolutely a joke. Number 2, and I'll make mine real short and quick because it's getting late, but I have yet to see anybody come out and really take a look. If the old saying about 100 words is worth a picture, at least a local visit by one of our congressmen or one of our local folks would come out and take a drive up and down Bonanza Avenue, that would be worth 1,000,000 words. So I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. And I've been out there. I'm not a congressman. Mr. Sitzman?
I agree.
Thank you. Just want to ask this question because they're kind of leaning, I can feel this leaning to try to compromise. Why not close the gate before the rezoning? Now, somebody said, I forget who it was, might have been, I forget who it was, said that Bonanza was the historic entrance to La Mariposa, which is incorrect. I've been here 28 years. the historic entrance is off of, there used to be 2 separate entrances off of Houghton. Bonanza became an access for some reason, and a number of years ago, the owners of La Mariposa closed that gate for an amount of time. I don't know exactly what caused it. Might have been complaints, but it was closed, and it was great. And my question is right now, why not just close the gate? Why not say, hey, we will close the gate? There's actually something else that it hasn't been mentioned yet, but just south of where the new homes that are being built right now, there's horse properties, and there's another access point there. So why not create a third access point instead of Bonanza? Okay, because they're all right on La Mariposa's properties, and they could all be access points out to Houghton instead of trying to use Bonanza. So they could really eliminate about of the negative responses just by saying, hey, we'll close the gate.
Thank you,
There
Mr.
we go.
Stutzman.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mr. Burns?
Thank you. I was pleased that the developer seems to want to resolve the Bonanza problem. First of all, by giving assurances that the residents would not be using transmitters. If they're members of the club, I guess they get a transmitter. Secondly, it was brought up that the developer would consider working with the city to have speed humps put in on Bonanza. Well, I know the city program for speed humps places the cost of those speed humps on the property owners along Bonanza. So who would pay for these humps, and what assurances could be given to the residents that are complaining about this, that they would in fact pay? They get the rezoning and no speed humps go in, what happens? The buildings are already up. And further, it was brought up, well, after they get the new tennis courts in, we'll consider closure of the back gate. Again, what assurances can be given that that is in fact going to happen? Just saying it doesn't make it happen. I agree with Mr. Sitzman. I think it was Mr. Sitzman said, hey, if you're going to close the gate, close it now. That solves the problem of traffic on Bonanza. We don't have to deal with it. We don't have to go through the expense of speed humps. It solves the problem. I understand that the gate and the developer of the proposed Casita Village is not the owner of the property where the gate is. So I'm not sure how all this comes together and what kind of assurances can we depend on if you decide that this rezoning is appropriate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. I mispronounced your name the first time. Mr. Augst?
No, you got it exactly right, and thank you. And again, thanks for the moment to speak. I'm curious, and I have lost track. Mr. Philip Aries, I wasn't sure if he was speaking on behalf of, I'll say, one of the interested parties in this, or if he was speaking as a concerned neighbor.
He's speaking on behalf of the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
To me, let me shift gear for a second. Again, AugieAux, I live at 9841 East Forest Grove Loop. I'm going to speak for a moment as just a homeowner in the area. Okay, we love where we live. Everyone here, we think this is a great area of Tucson, and we think it just encapsulates everything that's wonderful about the Southwest. Sunsets, we can see the stars at night, all those wonderful things. But let me cut to the chase, okay? Back to my job as representing Forest Grove HOA. We've had a couple conversations with the City of Tucson Department of Transportation. We've been concerned about, is it appropriate or not for a commercial facility, the business, if you will, of the La Mariposa Club, access off of the, and we from Powderhorn and Forest Grove HOA on the Bonanza side of this issue. And I appreciate the thoughts, the ideas. I would like to see some kind of commitment, if you will, to closing vehicular access other than perhaps emergency use, flooding, et cetera, from Bonanza onto that La Mariposa property that's down there. Again, I talked about, the I-95 issues, if you will, talking about Virginia, and people getting stranded and people being islanded because they've been surrounded by floodwaters. Beyond that, again, the overall concept of, are we being smart about further developing in an area that just has this unpredictability? So thank you for having that, if you will, rebuttal to that comment on closing the gate at Mariposa. It sounds like a pretty good long-term solution.
Thank you, Mr. August. I see one more hand up. Mr. Owen, would you like to close us out?
Yes, I would. I've been here since about 1990, and there's been numerous rezoning proposals from La Mariposa, and a lot of those zoning proposals included closing the gate onto Bonanza. But it was always a stipulation that, if we get the zoning, we'll close the gate, and they never did. They never did close the gate. And so what assurances do we have that they'll close the gate today and open it tomorrow? Bonanza is a city street. And in order to do any improvements on a city street, you need a permit from the city works department. La Mariposa has hired a private contractor to clear the street with a tread-driven backhoe, which will tear up the street. That's a violation of city permits and laws. What is, I'm seeing a kind of a pattern here of deception. One thing is said and something else is done. Now we have assurances that we're going to have the gate closed. But I heard that dialogue about 10 years ago. The gate's still open. We still have the same problems that we've had before. So I don't know. They need to produce, not just give us words. Put something behind these words and do something instead of trying some underhanded tactic, having meetings with short notice during the holidays so people can't prepare. I'm kind of wait and see what they're going to do. And right now, I don't feel they're going to do anything that they're saying they're going to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. So I'm going to break my rule and say we have two more speakers, and then that is it. Ms. Karsh? Catherine Karsh, you have your hand up. Would you like to speak?
Yes, this is Catherine Karsh. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please start with your name and address.
It's Catherine Karsh. I live at 9877 East Forest Grove Loop, right off Bonanza. And I am one of the unfortunate people that ended up in the Bonanza Wash during a severe storm in August of 2021. I agree that it would be a great boon to close the gate to the Mariposa, but that does not mitigate the problems that I feel will be incurred by the flooding that will be created by this project. We cannot add that much concrete, that much blacktop, or provide that much fill that will not have an impact on the flooding that will occur in our neighborhood. I feel that we are almost purposely, by even considering this proposal, to be in defiance of Mother Nature and climate change. We know that the flooding is predicted to increase. We know that storms and weather changes are predicted to increase. And I think as responsible citizens and caretakers of the earth, we have no business endorsing this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karsh. Ms. Willett?
Actually, I'm going to take this one real quick.
Ms. Morales?
Yes.
Thank you.
So we had a couple questions that came up with the where we're discussing the speed humps. To clarify, yes, the developer is willing to pay for those speed humps if the neighborhood will do the signatures and do what they need to do to get it approved through transportation department at the city. As far as the closure of the gate, we absolutely, the resort, when they get their development plan approved, are willing to close off any access to Bonanza. That, again, I think I said it before, it's an offsite thing. It's not related directly to this rezoning, but we are willing to put that in writing. If Mr. Urino, I'll defer to you as the attorney, if that's something that we cannot put in as a rezoning condition, we welcome that as a rezoning condition. If that is not a legal rezoning condition, we are willing to put that in writing and do that as a community agreement. That would be a private party agreement between the neighborhood and the resort.
Okay, anything further, Ms. Willett?
No, sir. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for their participation at tonight's hearing and at the prior hearing on this case. I want to say that, you know, in life, you don't always get what you want. And I won't quote Mick Jagger because I don't think that's appropriate here either. But I want you, each of you, on whatever side of the table you're sitting, to understand that I take very seriously every voice in this process. I do my best to reach a reasoned recommendation, and that's all I do anyway, is make a recommendation to mayor and council. But the last thing I want to leave you with is your participation in this process is very important. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your day or evening to have your voices heard, to think about it, to think about how it affects your community, your neighborhood. Very important. So everyone stay safe out there, and I'm closing the hearing. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yep.